Verses 13 to 29. His caution and consideration. v13 He went that night into the midst of the valley, to make the necessary dispositions for an attack, and to see that everything was in good order. It is the pious conjecture of the learned Bishop Patrick that he went into the valley alone, to pray to God for a blessing upon his enterprise, and he did not seek in vain. 5. His constancy and perseverance. When he had stretched out his spear towards the city, v18, a spear almost as fatal and formidable to the enemies of Israel as the rod of Moses was, he never drew back his hand till the work was done. His hands in fighting, like Moses's in interceding, were steady till the going down of the sun. Those that have stretched out their hands against their spiritual enemies must never draw them back. Lastly, what Joshua did in the stratagem is applicable to our Lord Jesus, of whom he was a type. Joshua conquered by yielding, as if he had himself been conquered, so our Lord Jesus, when he bowed his head and gave up the ghost, seemed as if death had triumphed over him, and as if he and all his interests had been rooted and ruined, but in his resurrection he rallied again and gave the powers of darkness a total defeat. He broke the serpent's head, by suffering him to bruise his heel. A glorious stratagem. What an obedient people Israel was! What Joshua commanded them to do, according to the commandment of the Lord, v8, they did it without murmuring or disputing. Those that were sent to lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai, 2 cities confederate against them, were in a post of danger, and had they been discovered might all have been cut off, and yet they ventured, and, when the body of the army retreated and fled, it was both disgraceful and perilous, and yet, in obedience to Joshua, they did it. What an infatuated enemy the king of Ai was! That he did not by his scouts discover those that lay in ambush behind the city, v14. Some observe it as a remarkable instance of the power of God in making men blind to their own interest, and the things that belong to their peace, that he wist not that there were liars in wait against him. Those are most in danger who are least aware that they are so. That when Israel seemed to fly he drew out all his forces to pursue them, and left none to guard his city and to secure his retreat, v17. Thus the church's enemies often run themselves into destruction by their own fury and the violence of their rage against the Israel of God. Pharaoh plunged himself into the Red Sea by the eagerness with which he pursued Israel. That from the killing of 36 men out of 3,000, when Israel made the former attack upon his city, he should infer the total routing of so great an army as now he had to deal with, v6. They flee before us as at the first. See how the prosperity of fools destroys them and hardens them to their ruin. God had made use of the men of Ai as a scourge to chastise his people for meddling with the accursed thing, and this had puffed them up with a conceit that they must have the honor of delivering their country from these formidable invaders, but they were soon made to see their mistake, and that when the Israelites had reconciled themselves to their God they could have no power against them. God had made use of them only for the rebuking of Israel, with the purpose, when the correction was over, to throw the rod itself into the fire. Howbeit, they meant not so, but it was in their heart to destroy and cut off. What a complete victory Israel obtained over them by the favor and blessing of God! Each did his part. The divided forces of Israel, by signals agreed on, understood one another, and everything succeeded according to the project, so that the men of Ai, even when they were most confident of victory, found themselves surrounded, so that they had neither spirit to resist nor room to fly, but were under a fatal necessity of yielding their lives to the destroyers. And now it is hard to say whether the shouts of the men of Israel, or the shrieks of the men of Ai, were the louder, but easy to imagine what terror and confusion they were filled with, when their highest assurances sunk so suddenly into the heaviest despair. Note, the triumphing of the wicked is short. They are exalted for a little while, that their fall and ruin may be the sorer. See how easily, how quickly, the scale turns against those that have not God on their side. We have here an account of the improvement which the Israelites made of their victory over Ai. They put all to the sword, not only in the field, but in the city, man, woman, and child, none of them remained, v24. God, the righteous judge, had passed this sentence upon them for their wickedness, so that the Israelites were only the ministers of his justice and the executioners of his doom. Once in this story, and but once, mention is made of the men of Bethel, as confederates with the men of Ai, v. 17. Though they had a king of their own, and were not subjects to the king of Ai, for the king of Bethel is reckoned among the 31 kings that Joshua destroyed, ch. 12:16, yet Ai being a stronger place they threw themselves into that, for their own safety, and the strengthening of their neighbors' hands, and so, we may presume, were all cut off with them, thus that by which they hoped to prevent their own ruin hastened it. The whole number of the slain, it seems, was but 12,000, an inconsiderable body to make head against all the thousands of Israel, but those whom God will destroy he infatuates. Here it is said, v. 26, that Joshua drew not his hand back wherewith he stretched out the spear, v. 18, till the slaughter was completed. Some think the spear he stretched out was not to slay the enemies, but to animate and encourage his own soldiers, some flag or ensign being hung out at the end of this spear, and they observe it as an instance of his self-denial that though the fire of courage wherewith his breast was filled would have pushed him forward, sword in hand, into the hottest of the action, yet, in obedience to God, he kept the inferior post of a standard-bearer, and did not quit it till the work was done. By the spear stretched out, he directed the people to expect their help from God, and to him to give the praise. They plundered the city and took all the spoil to themselves, v. 27. Thus the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just, the spoil they brought out of Egypt, by borrowing of their neighbors, was much of it expended upon the tabernacle they had reared in the wilderness, for which they are now reimbursed with interest. The spoil here taken, it is probable, was all brought together, and distributed by Joshua in due proportions, as that of the Midianites was. It was not seized with irregularity or violence, for God is the God of order and equity, and not of confusion. They laid the city in ashes, and left it to remain so, v. 28. Israel must yet dwell in tents, and therefore this city, as well as Jericho, must be burnt. And, though there was no curse entailed upon him that should rebuild it, yet, it seems, it was not rebuilt unless it be the same with Ijah, which we read of, long after. Some think it was not rebuilt because Israel had received a defeat before it, the remembrance of which should be buried in the ruins of the city. The king of Ai was taken prisoner and cut off, not by the sword of war as a soldier, but by the sword of justice as a malefactor. Joshua ordered him to be hanged, and his dead body thrown at the gate of his own city, under a heap of stone, v. 23, 29. Some particular reason, no doubt, there was for this severity against the king of Ai. It is likely he had been notoriously wicked and vile, and a blasphemer of the God of Israel, perhaps upon occasion of the repulse he had given to the forces of Israel in their first onset. Some observe that his dead body was thrown at the gate where he had been wont to sit in judgment, that so much the greater contempt might thereby be poured upon the dignity he had been proud of, and he might be punished for the unrighteous decrees he had made in the very place where he had made them. Thus the Lord is known by the judgments which he executes.